a man who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. For Halloween this year, I wish someone would hand out cups of coffee for us older folks. Not that I go trick or treating, but if someone did, I would. Of course, it needs to be the best coffee in the universe, but you can only find that at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson here in Laredo, or organicmancoffeetrike.shop for the rest of y'all. Coffee makes life better, and the best coffee makes life the best. I've done a few Halloween shows, a few as in a whole bunch, and I try to always get new content each time. It's difficult because A, I'm kind of forgetful, and B, sometimes I'll do a story and then completely forget that I did it and then do it again. So, yeah, that's like I said, I'm forgetful. I also try to give you nothing but true stories, but unfortunately, well, that's a little difficult to do because some people who are into writing fiction present it as if it's a true account. I don't know why they do that, but I guess they're taking up after the politicians who don't know how not to lie. Last week, I was going to do a Halloween show because it's October, and I completely forgot. I had started on my notes, and then I got to looking into a few movies that I like, and the next thing I know, I'm doing a show about movies and not about Halloween stuff. Of course, if you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, maybe that'll put you in the mood for Halloween. I went for a little bicycle ride, and then I got home and I needed to clean my bike because it had rained and, well, there was mud everywhere. I always like to listen to a podcast while I'm working out in the yard. So I brought up Josh Turner, Paranormal Roundtable, and I was listening to him telling a story about a weird cat, which, since all cats are weird, I guess that would make it normal. Except this cat walked on 2 legs. As I'm listening to him, I suddenly realized, oh shoot, I need to do a Halloween show or 2 or 3. So here we are back in Halloween, trying to come up with some new stuff for y'all. I also run into a few stories with no names or dates, which makes it a little peculiar, but I'll add a name, might not give it a date, simply because it makes the story flow better. I'll usually use the same couple of names just because, well, that's the way my brain works. I hope I do justice to these stories without adding too much color. I used to have a movie, Buckaroo Banzai, on a VHS tape. It had no music, just the sound effects. It was kind of weird to watch. Just acting and sound, kind of like real life. Could you imagine what life would be like if we had our own background music? Would it be better or worse? Well, let's get on with the show. Want to take a ride? If you don't get that one, well, you're too young. Bob lived in Dayton, Ohio, home of the Wright-Patterson Air Base. Lots of UFO technology. This story has nothing to do with flying saucers. He was driving through town one day with his 3-year-old son in the car. As they were passing a cemetery, his son said, "Wow, look at all those people." Bob glanced over, but he didn't see anyone. He figured maybe his son was just talking to hear himself make words. He was quite young. Bob asked his son what he was looking at, and his son said, "All those people over there in that garden. Most of them look like grandmoms or granddads." Bob still didn't see anyone, so he just kept driving. His son went on to say, "I don't think those people were alive. They were all staring at the ground at their feet." Bob decided it was best to get home and not dwell on the cemetery and the folks in it. If I were a ghost, I don't think I would hang out in a cemetery. There's not much to do there. Smell the flowers, look at the names on other people's tombstones. What would you do in a cemetery? Heck no, I think I'd go haunt a movie theater where I could watch movies for free. Closer to home, for me anyway, this next story comes from Corpus Christi. George was heading home after work, and his route took him by the Seaside Cemetery. As he was passing the graveyard, he saw a man, a woman, and a young boy standing on the sidewalk. They looked like they were maybe waiting for the bus. As George was passing them, the trio all waved at him as if they might know him or perhaps he had met him somewhere. George waved back, wondering who they were. He was passing the bus stop when he began to wonder why these people were waiting on the street so far from the stop. The next day, at around the same hour, George was once more passing the cemetery, and he saw those same 3 people standing on the sidewalk. And once more they all waved to him, and he waved back. The third time George saw these people, he took a long look at them, trying to see if he did know them. He took in their old style clothing and the way they all looked like they were out of some forgotten time. It dawned on him these people might be ghosts. Thinking there had to be a logical explanation for 3 people to look like spirits, George asked his son to go for a ride with him one day. They took the drive over to the cemetery. As they were coming close, George asked his son to tell if he saw anybody standing on the corner. The son said he didn't see anybody, but George was looking at 3 waving people on the side of the street. He was so freaked out by the way they all looked and acted, George decided to drive home another route. The new route took longer, but he no longer had to have a daily encounter with any spirits. After avoiding the cemetery for a few weeks, George got to thinking he was probably just mistaken. There was no way he could have seen a ghost, let alone 3 of them, in the middle of the afternoon. This was just too bizarre. Convinced he was wrong, George decided to drive by the cemetery to prove to himself that he just imagined it. There couldn't be anything paranormal going on. As he approached the spot, there they were, 3 people, all dressed the same way, all waving at him as he went by. This time George just stared at them, and he didn't bother to wave back because he was thinking, this is just too weird to actually buy into it. As he came to the corner where the bus stop was, he saw the 3 people once more. They had somehow jumped ahead from one end of the cemetery to the other faster than he could drive. As the three waved at George, he quickly waved back. He was afraid that if he didn't, they just might keep following him all the way back to his house. From that day on, George has made a policy to never drive by the seaside cemetery ever again. He often wonders why he was the only person to see those three, and what would have happened if he hadn't actually waved when they did. The Stanley Hotel is in Estes Park, Colorado. It's been around for over 100 years. It was built as a gateway for the wealthy seeking solitude from the everyday riffraff. Those of us that don't have any money. Like any isolated place, as the years passed, visitors became fewer and fewer. By the 1970s, the hotel was pretty shabby looking. It was around that time that Stephen King spent the night there, and he was inspired to write the book The Shining. The book and film helped return the Stanley to some form of glory as people began showing up wanting to see the place, rent a room, and maybe have an encounter of their own. Many visitors have reported strange things happening inside as well as outside the old building. Just because it's old is no reason for a haunting. Just because a few weird deaths is still not it. Let's face it, hauntings happen for unknown reasons. Those experts who say over and over how ghosts have unfinished business or they died in some violent death, they need to do a little more history reading. If this were true, why isn't the Somme haunted beyond belief? The Somme is where one of the bloodiest battles of World War I took place. Thousands, literally thousands of bodies were never recovered. They simply were blown to bits and they left them where they died. And yet, whenever paranormal researchers go to the Somme, they hardly ever have any kind of paranormal activity. You can't get more violent than World War I. When the hotel was 2 years old, there was a flood which knocked out the power in the area. Freeland Stanley took it upon himself to do a little home improvements. Well, he put a gas light in each of the rooms so they could have light if the power did go out again. Chambermaid Elizabeth Wilson entered the room with a lit candle and set off a massive explosion. Wilson was launched from the room, down the stairs, and wound up laying on her back in the dining room. Somehow she managed to survive and she recovered and went on to continue working at the hotel. I'll bet she didn't walk around with a lit candle anymore. 10% of the hotel was damaged and it needed a lot of paint. Once the hotel was back in shape, the doors opened and guests began showing up once more. Wilson continued working at the hotel up until 1950. She must have loved the place because after her death, guests believe she is still cleaning rooms. According to some hotel guests and staff, her spirit is said to still inhabit room 217. But reports say she's typically more helpful than scary. Guests have shared stories of waking up in the morning to find the room has been cleaned while they slept. All of their clothes have been neatly folded and placed on a chair or back in their suitcases. Any suitcases in the room are neatly lined up against the wall. One couple who stayed in the hotel woke in the morning to find that the bed had been made while they were still in it. It was all neatly smoothed out, and the sheets were tucked in, and they were somewhat surprised. Stanley had died in 1940 at the age of 91. Many believe that he's still hanging out at the hotel. They'll see his shadowy shape at either the bar or in the billiards room. That's a pool room for the lower class folks like me. The phantom of his wife, Flora, has a tendency to sit at the piano in the main lobby and play with the keys once in a while, one or two little notes. Some hotel tour guides say a ghost of a child wanders the property, and this child likes to play with people's hair. Guests on the fourth floor of the Stanley have shared stories of hearing children laughing and running in the hallways when there's nobody around to be making these sounds. If you stay the night in room 217 and you're not married to the person that's there with you, you might not have a comfortable sleep. People have said that they feel a chilly presence actually climb into bed with them and sit or lay in between them and their partner. Texas resident Henry Yao booked a last minute getaway in April 2016. He'd heard all the stories and he wanted to do a little investigating on his own. When my wife and I stayed at the Menger Hotel, I ran all over the place with my camera taking pictures. I didn't get anything. Yao had dinner and then wandered around the hotel taking photos. At the foot of the staircase, he waited for the people to clear the area, and then he took a picture, thinking nothing of it. Within a few minutes, he began to feel sick. He developed chills, and he was unable to sleep. All night long, he sweated and shivered as if he had a really bad case of food poisoning. It had him by the shorts. Yes, Jethro Tull said that a little different. It was suggested that he should head to the ER, but he just gritted his teeth and hoped for the best, prayed that it wouldn't be the worst. The next morning they checked out and headed home. He sat on the passenger seat and just kind of tried to make the best of things. He got out his camera and began thumbing through the images that he had taken. When he got to the one from the staircase, he could see somebody standing at the very top. Kind of a hazy shape, but definitely somebody standing there. He posted the image online, and several people said that there are actually two images at the top of the stairs. Everyone tells him he caught a couple of ghosts. Anytime you're taking photos in what might be a haunted location, don't take just one. Take at least two shots in each direction. If something does show up in one, but not both, you have a far better chance of saying that this is a spirit you caught and not some kind of a reflection or something else. Azucena and her husband, Raul, live in Laredo. I hope that's how she pronounces it. It's been a few years since I talked to her. Azucena and Raul. They drive to Eagle Pass a lot, and one day they were heading back to Laredo when, and her brother Cesar was in the back seat. As they were driving along FM 83 North, they felt a bounce and they heard a thud as if they'd run over something. Uh, Raul pulled over, thinking that maybe he'd hit a javelina or some piece of trash, and he wanted to check his truck to make sure there wasn't any damage. He pulled over and he looked. He looked along both sides and along the underside, and he didn't see anything, not even brush marks in the dirt. He looked back along the road to see what he might have run over, and there was nothing there. No potholes, no debris, nothing that could have caused the vehicle to bounce or to make that thud sound. They'd all felt it and heard it, but there was nothing there to show for it. On another trip back to Laredo, once more as they were entering Catarina, Azucena and Raoul both felt the truck bounce as if something big had landed on the roof. The next day, while getting things from the bed of the pickup, she clomb into the bed and stood up. She could see the roof, and it looked like a set of handprints in the dust. She could see how the fingers slid along the roof, leaving trails. On their trip from Laredo going to Eagle Pass, driving a red compact with a sunroof, they spotted a bright light up in the sky. At first, they convinced themselves it was just a helicopter. The light broke into several lights, and they began flying in an erratic manner, crossing in between each other, as well as moving from side to side in quick manner that no pilot could have possibly done. It was so strange to watch they began to get scared, wondering what the lights really were. Azucena saw a white flash go by the car at the same time that Raoul said, "I think I saw her," meaning the ghost of Catarina. Long before Texas was a state, the Camino Real, the old Spanish road, ran from Mexico to Louisiana. It cut through this area. A group traveling along the road were attacked by hostile Indians. One person was killed, a young woman named Catarina. Her last name was lost to history. A nearby stream was named in her honor. Since 1778, the name Catarina has been connected with this area. 1910, when the railroad came through, Joseph Green put the ranch headquarters near the depot. A small town grew up around the headquarters, which became the town of Catarina. Many folks say the ghost is that of the long dead Spanish woman killed in that attack. Her grave site is no longer known. The Catarina Hotel has had many sightings of paranormal things that most will say is the ghost of Catarina. When Marty was a child back in the 1990s, she was a fan of ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his dummy sidekick, Charlie McCarthy. For those of you too young to know, Bergen would appear on radio shows. Yes, you could see, you could not see what was going on or who was doing it. And yet he would be there on the radio using a ventriloquist's dummy to entertain the audience. When TV became popular, at least then you could see the dummy moving its mouth. I don't like ventriloquists. That 1978 movie Magic really put a nail in that coffin. Anthony Hopkins' first really good part. Hannibal Lecter, of course, that's the ultimate Anthony Hopkins. Marty says her father found a ventriloquist's doll as he was wandering through a small magic shop in Santa Rosa, California. He decided to buy it for her birthday. Marty said the cashier gave her father a weird look and said, "You know, when you put your hand inside the doll, it comes to life." He bought the doll with a laugh and he took it home to his daughter. Marty was over the moon with her dad's gift, saying she was so happy when she got the doll, she kind of became obsessed with it. As happy as a witch in a broom factory. strange things began to happen. The doll's head was made out of hard plastic, but she said its expression would change. It would smile or frown, depending on what was going on. Worried something weird was happening to her dummy, Marty's family shut it away in a cupboard during the night. One night she and her family were awoken by the sound of small feet running through the living room. Going to see who it might be, Marty didn't see anybody alive. The doll was sitting on the couch. She was convinced the doll was coming to life and moving about the house at night, even though it had been locked in the cabinet before everybody went to bed. Did you see the night gallery, the doll? I don't like dolls either, especially those real lifelike looking ones. Now, the family wasn't worried something might happen to the doll. They were worried something might happen to them. Other strange occurrences began happening. While Marty and her dad were away, her uncle was alone in the house. The uncle said he heard Marty's father calling his name from the living room, even though he knew he wasn't there. When he took a look, he found the doll sitting on the couch once again. Nobody else was even in the house. Things kept getting weirder. Others began hearing their names being called, usually by someone else in the family. This is what's known as the mimic phenomenon. It was time for the doll to go bye-bye. How do you go about getting rid of a haunted or cursed object, like a doll or a Ouija board? One thing you absolutely do not do is try to burn it. Nay, nay, burning cursed or haunted objects is not good. Destroying any cursed object might release whatever it is possessing it. This goes for any kind of an object that you believe is cursed. Don't try to burn it. Don't try to destroy it. That's just, you're asking for trouble. Instead, the recommendation is you should take it to a priest, one that you know and trust. Tell them everything you know about the object and let them deal with it. You do run the risk of having one of the religious folks that don't really believe in the paranormal, which I find to be somewhat hilarious. This is right up there with soldiers that don't believe in killing. They're doing the wrong job. If you don't have a priest you can go to, or they're one of those people, dig a deep hole. I mean deep. Not just 2 or 3 feet, 8, 9 feet. Watch for power lines and cables. Tree roots are a pain in the butt, but you're going to have to dig. Bury the thing, and as you're filling the hole back up, drop a whole bunch of hard objects in there, like rocks and old metal things that you no longer want. Anything that if somebody else is digging a hole in that same spot, they'll get discouraged and stop. Bury the thing as deep as you can with as much junk on top of it. You must have seen the movie Jumanji. Marty says her parents decided they were going to burn the doll. They put it in the grill, and according to Marty, it wouldn't burn. No matter how hot the flames got, the doll just laid there, not dissolving into ash. They then tried cutting into pieces, but that didn't work either. Finally, they threw it in the trash can along with the rest of the house garbage and waited for the garbage truck to come by. Marty's dad went to retrieve the trash can. The doll was still in it. To rid themselves of the dummy, they dug a hole in the backyard and they filled it back in with cement. Marty and family then moved away, hoping that that was the last they would ever see the ventriloquist's dummy, hoping it wouldn't follow them. If you happen to have an unexplained small cement pad in your yard, you probably don't want to dig it up, just in case. Jacqueline from Oklahoma says years ago she had an imaginary friend. Her grandparents lived in a small home with a huge yard. Jacqueline would visit them as a child. One of her best memories was sitting under the shade of a tree with her grandfather. They would sit there and he would tell her all kinds of stories about all the things he had done when he was younger. It wasn't important at the time that her grandfather had died a year before Jacqueline had been born. Being an open minded family, everybody knew they had spirits living or hanging out in the house. Jacqueline was the only one who not only saw him, but would sit and talk with him on a regular basis. The grandmother would go stay in town with friends on the anniversary of his death. The She had some superstitious ideas about being in a house where somebody had died on the anniversary of their death. One of the most haunted restaurants in America. I wish folks would stop using that descriptive, the most haunted. Too many places are said to be the most haunted this or the most haunted that. The star system is what we need to use, like the one for hotels and restaurants. 1 star and it's okay for the kids to go. 5 stars and your grandmother's going to wake up screaming even if she's in another state. Stone's Public House in Ashland, Massachusetts is said to have a lot of ghosts. Janet Morazzini is the manager and bartender at the public house, which was built by John Stone in 1832. Marazzoni says even before she began working at the inn, she'd heard stories of the ghost of a young boy that roamed the halls. Some people say the ghosts are there because the building was used as a hospital, better known as a dying place, during the Spanish Inquisition. No, the Spanish flu of 1918. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish flu, yes. Did you know most people that died from the Spanish flu actually died from a viral lung infection brought on by breathing through a face mask all the time? Being an old building, the place has been witness to a few unfortunate deaths. A young girl was run over by a train that ran right next to the house. Her spirit is still hanging around for unknown reasons. A father and son were having lunch at the house. A train was approaching. So the son wanted to go watch it go by, and the father took him out and they sat on a bench as the train passed. Once back in the restaurant, the son asked about that little girl that was sitting next to him. The father said there was nobody but the two of them on that bench. The son insisted a little girl had come and sat down next to him. He said she kept crying the whole time she was there. Keep in mind, a lot of ghost sightings don't look like ghosts. We have been shown ghosts on TV and movies, and they look like what Hollywood thinks a ghost should look. Most of the ghost sightings I've been told or described to me by people say it looked like a solid person. They looked like a living, breathing human right up until they vanished. People also report seeing an old man who's become known as John Stone, the man that built the house. He's seen around the place as if he's keeping an eye on his property. People hear footsteps coming from upstairs even when they know there's nobody there. In the 1990s, Julie was living in Portland, Oregon. One day, as she was driving out to the countryside to meet up with some friends, Julie found herself stuck in traffic. This was a weekend and traffic was usually light, so she guessed there must have been a wreck or something. The cars began to slowly creep along as everybody was being directed to move to the left lane. Up ahead, Julie saw flashing lights and emergency vehicles, but nobody seemed to be doing anything, just standing around. As she was passing the wreck, Julie spotted a body laying on the ground, covered by a blanket. This had been the driver of the car, who was no longer amongst the living. It's a weird feeling when you show up at a scene only to realize there's nothing you can do for the patient other than wait for the body car to come collect them. Obviously dead is a term that we used once in a while, like if the heart or the brains are no longer inside the body. Julie did her best to drive by without glancing over. She didn't need that image burned into her memory. As the accident was no longer alongside her, Julie suddenly saw a woman sitting next to her. This woman just appeared out of nowhere. The woman was dressed as if on her way to work. She turned and looked at Julie and then demanded to know what she was doing in her car, followed by, how did she wind up in Julie's car? This is not something covered in your book of solutions for life. Julie thought about the situation and said, Ma'am, you need to calm down. It was the only thing she could think of. She told the woman her name and asked if she could help out somehow. Julie was beginning to believe the woman had been the driver of the car that she had passed. Julie went on to explain to the woman that maybe she'd been in a car accident and somehow wound up being a passenger in her car. The woman was stricken. She looked like she'd seen a ghost or had just become one. Julie kept driving, wondering, what do you do next? As they were passing a clearing in the trees, the woman looked over towards the sun and then disappeared. Julie pulled over, convincing herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Several days later, a story came on the news about the car accident. A car had been hit by an 18-wheeler and the driver had been killed, thrown from the vehicle. The news agency showed a photograph of the woman, and it was the same one that had wound up in Julie's car. If this were to happen to you, what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? The Ohio State Reformatory, also known as the Mansfield Reformatory, was built between 1886 and continued under construction until 1910. The remaining operating unit, the unit remained in operation until 1990. It was intended as a place for wayward boys to be sent in an effort to change their ways. Catch them while they're young and keep them from becoming any worse. October 15th, 1896, the reformatory opened its doors to the first 150 real criminals. These prisoners were brought in by train from Columbus and put to work building the 25-foot stone wall that was to enclose the complex. Nothing will keep boys on the straight and narrow like being housed with real criminals. What were they thinking? Over 200 people died at the reformatory turned prison, including 2 guards who were killed during escape attempts. The thing about prisons, they aren't what you call a nice place to live or work. My brother was a bopper. He worked for the Bureau of Prisons. He worked at Oxford, Leavenworth. I think he might have been at Lewisburg. They moved him around a lot because he became the construction and maintenance supervisor. I got to actually tour Leavenworth. The air inside felt heavy, and no matter where we were, you could feel the prisoners were staring at us. They wanted to know who the heck I was. Mansfield began housing some of the worst. The folks who have never dealt with people like this haven't a clue how nasty some people can be. The folks crying about the death penalty have never buried a loved one because of crime. And now I'm ranting. The maximum security prison was once the site of murders, suicides, and other violent encounters. The people working inside these facilities sometimes pick up the bad energy and it stays with them. Once in a while, 1 or 2 guards start out being evil, but they don't get caught during the hiring process. The Mansfield Penitentiary was shut down in the 90s due to overcrowding and inhumane living conditions. Most jails and prison facilities have reputations for hauntings even when they're still open. All that bad energy being bottled up in one place over years is bound to have an effect on the building as well as those in it. During a ghost hunt, the investigators caught the sounds of a woman crying. Since no women were ever incarcerated in the facility, they suspect this might have been the wife of the warden who had accidentally been shot while getting something out of the closet. The warden lived at the prison along with his family. Gun safety wasn't a thing back then. It was common to just set loaded pistols on a shelf for easy access. How it went off, that's another question. Guns don't simply go bang on their own. Another spirit that's said to haunt the reformatory is also a woman who's seen sitting in the prison chapel. She is also crying. When you approach this woman sitting in the pew, she disappears. Other people have seen her walking around. Nobody is sure who she was or why she's in the prison. Maybe she's a family member of one of the inmates who was pulled into or simply walked into the place after her death. It's surprising how that works. Not all ghosts are tied to the location they're haunting. Some are simply visiting. Investigators have heard what sounds like prisoners cussing at them, personally, as they're tried to see what was inside the different cells. Hearing a mean, nasty prisoner is one thing. Seeing one is something else. One night, a shadowy figure was spotted reflected in one of the windows. It looked as mean as it sounded. This was bad, but then the shadow followed the investigator home. Anytime we do an investigation, no matter if it's big or small, we open and close the event with a prayer. Ishmael will tell everybody if they don't want to participate, to just kind of go stand on their own and wait for the rest of the group. I would say, fend for yourselves. Well, I would think it anyway, not really say it. I've seen and heard from people who thought it was all just fun and games until something followed them home and they had to get professional help to make it go away. If this should happen to you, the best thing to do if you don't want to ask somebody to come do an exorcism on your house, the best thing to do is ignore the spirit. If it doesn't receive energy through your being scared to death by it haunting your house, eventually it's going to literally dry up and blow away or go somewhere else. Since ghosts and spirits can't eat food, they have to get their energy from somewhere else. And they really hate it when you ignore them. Ambulance work can be both rewarding and frustrating, and sometimes at the exact same moment. Way back when I was an almost new medic, we had a guy who was known for doing the wrong thing at the right time. One evening at a vehicle accident, he called in saying that nobody was requesting medical attention. It was quiet for a few minutes, and then he went code 3 to the hospital with one. Not unheard of. After a bad wreck, some people will be so amped up on adrenaline, they don't realize that they have some major injuries. As the adrenaline wears off, the pain sets in. Only the patient hadn't been involved in the accident. He was some belligerent bystander who'd had a few too many and decided to tell anyone what he thought of the ambulance crew. The radio is intended to communicate with dispatch. It can also be, be used to knock some loudmouth unconscious if swung hard enough. The radio and the drunk's skull were both broken. The medic got written up for losing his temper. I don't think he was charged for the radio, and he had to take a week off work. In the mid 1990s, Bob worked as a paramedic in a small town in Texas. Rural ambulance sometimes have to search for their patients. The address might not be shown in front of the house, or the numbers might not be correct. It could be somebody else's address that you receive, just because that sort of thing happens. Bob and his partner, I'll call him Jimmy, received a call for a woman having chest pain. They took off in the right direction, looking for the house. Before GPS or 9/11, we used maps and a know-how to find patients. Once outside the city, it was pitch black, and Bob and Jimmy drove along through the night. Jimmy pulled into a driveway and killed the siren and lights. Flashing red lights can have a bad effect on patients who are having a heart attack. Same with the siren. Unfortunately, they'd pulled in the wrong driveway, so they had to back out and find the right one. They grabbed their bags and walked to the front door. Once on the front porch, Bob noticed this address was the same one they'd been to about a month earlier, where they'd had a man with a heart attack, only he didn't survive. He was what we call DRT, dead right there. Okay, some of y'all might find that a bit unkind. You are also the same folks who have never tried to save somebody's life, but are willing to tell those who have what they did wrong. If you can't laugh about it, it's going to make you cry. In typical medical black humor, they mentioned to each other that this was probably the man's wife, who was now having a heart attack and was about to go join her husband. Yes, we used to do that all the time. The first thing you do if the patient is conscious is you give them oxygen. Lots of time, this is all they need. They get stressed and they can't catch their breath. This leads to a sick feeling, lightheadedness, and an uncomfortable sensation in the middle of their chest. Oxygen can usually clear it up real quick. Bob advised the patient she should still go to the hospital ER to get checked out, just in case. When she said yes, Jimmy walked back out to the unit to get the stretcher. As they were wheeling out the patient, they noticed all the lights were on the ambulance. It looked very festive and serious. Bright red and blue lights flashing, with bright white lights aimed in all directions. After taking the patient to the hospital, Bob asked his partner why he'd turned on all the lights. Jimmy said he didn't. He said he grabbed the stretcher and went back into the house. The unit was dark as he was heading in. Jimmy didn't turn on the lights. Bob didn't turn on the lights. They were miles from anybody, so who did it? In the end, they both agreed the dead husband had probably turned the lights on to get his wife to the hospital as fast as possible. When Sarah was a bit young, she had a dog named Cricket. According to everybody, Cricket was not a happy camper. Have you ever had a pet that just seemed to drag itself through life, each day an unwanted chore? This was how Cricket was described. But still, she was her dog, and she was fond of her. As the family was packing to go on a trip, Cricket ran out into traffic and became a road pizza. She was Kerputsky. She went blump blump, and that was that. I hate it when that happens, even if it's not one of mine. I've found a few dead animals here and there, and I always try to bury them in the yard. I have a veritable pet cemetery going on now. I can't really tell you how many pets or animals are buried in my backyard. Despite the loss, the family had already paid for their vacation, and they were not going to waste the money that they didn't have a whole lot of. So they asked their aunt if she would take care of Cricket's body, and they were going to hit the road. The aunt said that she would dig a hole, put the body in, say a few words, and cover it up. The family, especially, lost her name, especially Sarah, were quite uncomfortable on the drive to the hotel. She couldn't stop thinking about her poor dead dog. The family got to the hotel and they checked in, kind of in a unhappy silence. Once they were checked into the hotel, they tried to relax a bit and amp up the joy. At bedtime, everybody did their nighttime things and jumped between the sheets. Sometime in the middle of the night, something woke Sarah. She didn't hear or feel anything, but there was something. Sitting up, she looked at the floor. There was Cricket, only he was happy looking. He jumped around like a puppy instead of the grumpy old dog he had been. It was like she was coming to tell Sarah she was okay. It was an extremely clear apparition, as if a real live dog. Sarah told her mother about it in the morning, who said it was probably just her imagination, trying to deal with the loss of a pet. Built in the 1800s, the Willoughby Coal Building in Willoughby, Ohio, housed a variety of businesses in its time, including a train depot, cheese factory, and a flour mill. 1912, it became a very prosperous Willoughby coal supply, supplying local residents before it was sold to Henry Windus and William Norris in 1930s. Over time, the relationship between the two men grew contentious. Windus wanted to buy the business from Norris, but Norris said, "Nay, nay, I will not sell it to you." Okay, maybe that's not what he said, but he did refuse to sell. One morning, Norris told his wife he was going out to buy bread and he was going to check on some repairs being done at the building. He never came home. Several hours later, his body was discovered at the front door of the building. He was laying in a bloody heap. Even though his death was ultimately ruled an accident, the Norris family believed he had been murdered. Nobody knew what really happened that morning. Since the building has become unoccupied, ghost investigators flock to the location because of reports from others. People have seen faces looking out of windows when the building was locked up and empty. The usual sounds of footsteps and shadowy figures is reported on a regular basis. I've heard a few stories about haunted truck stops. I wonder why these places seem to have more than their share of spirits. In 2014, around midnight, a couple of soldiers on leave were driving along a small country highway on their way to Indianapolis when they discovered they were about to run out of gas. Add to the problem, they had no cash. At the last possible second, a truck stop came into view on the side of the road, so they stopped, hoping to somehow convince the people to allow them to get enough gas to make it into town. The truck stop looked old, it was in need of paint, and only one truck was in the parking lot. This truck also looked as if it hadn't turned a wheel in some time. A light was visible from the diner, so they went in, hoping for the best. Inside they found a decent looking diner, occupied by a waitress, a cook, and one lone truck driver. The pair told their story, and the trucker handed them $20 for gas. They thanked him and swore they would pay him back before heading back outside to put some gas in the tank and getting back on the road. They said as soon as they could find an ATM, they would get the $20 and return it. The sun was up as they drove back to the truck stop and pulled into the parking lot. The place looked abandoned. The lights were off. The pumps looked as if somebody had tried to steal them. The windows were boarded up and the door was locked. As they stood there trying to figure out what was going on, a police car pulled in behind them, thinking they were trying to break in. Once convinced they were not doing anything bad, the officer asked them what they were doing. They explained what had happened just a few hours before, to which the cop chuckled and he replied, "Oh, you met the three ghosts." I've heard a lot of stories of people getting assistance from ghosts, gas money, or a ride into town, sometimes even food. How is this possible if ghosts are simply dead people? The Laredo Health Department has more than its share of spirit activity. At the end of the day, after the clients have gone home and the staff have finished up, it's time for the custodians to sweep up and empty the trash. One night, as the two men were finishing up, they discovered they were not alone in the building. As they finished each office, they would shut off the lights and close the door, making their way towards the exit. The hall was to be the last light switch flipped as they exited the structure. Reaching over to the switch plate, the senior custodian just kind of glanced down the hall in the direction they'd come from. "Who in the world is that?" He pointed down the hall. His partner turned and looked. "I don't know, but we should get the heck out of here, now." He slipped out the door quickly, followed by the senior custodian. Neither of them wanted to be inside the building in the dark with what they had seen. Standing in the hallway was a nun, dressed in her white habit, her coif, I think that's how it's pronounced, COIF, that funny looking hat that they wear. It looked like something from the TV show, The Flying Nun. If you've never seen The Flying Nun, it was one of those TV shows that you really had to ask yourself, what the world were people thinking back then? This nun was walking along the corridor as if she owned the place. She would have had to have walked right past these two men in order to be in the position that she was in when they had spotted her. Neither man was afraid of seeing a nun, but a ghost nun, that was another matter. They scurried out the door and left in a hurry. On a separate occasion, the custodians had already been outside the building after locking all the doors. They were walking to their cars when they saw the nun, still dressed in white, walking along the hallway through one of the windows. Part of their job was to be sure that nobody got locked inside the building, and they had searched the place already. Knowing she wasn't staff or a visitor or among the living, they hurried away, hoping to never see her again. The Laredo Health Department has a lot, and I mean a lot, of strange occurrences. I've talked about the little girl in the past, and they've had a few other things, which is kind of strange, but hey, that's how ghosts behave. We don't know what they're doing. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. As I was talking about the ghost grandfather, I got to thinking I may have already told that story once before. I'm not too sure. If you enjoyed tonight's show, tell other people they should be listening as well. If you didn't enjoy the show, why are you still listening? If you have a story you'd like to share or a comment you'd like to make, you can reach me by email at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Until next Saturday, there, I said it again. Until next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.